Hey, welcome. So we're going to continue with the Gita study course. And today we're entering the yoga of knowledge. So this is the fourth aspect of the Gita, using the word aspect loosely. These first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita are interrelated in a unique way, where each affects the other. So as we speak on each of these chapters, each is bringing to light another aspect of the nature of the Gita's path. And all these aspects are present at a practical level when we're engaged consciously in yoga. And they come in different sequences. For example, we're now at the 4th step. The first step was the yoga of dejection. And what is dejection? It's waking up to your bondage. You're in a state of suffering. So dejection's always suffering. So there is a path to truth that's based on suffering. And when you suffer, what happens? You say, why am I suffering? How can I get out of the suffering? What did I do to cause the suffering? And when this leads us to discrimination. And discrimination then leads us to, the yoga of discrimination leads us to the yoga of action, which is we start behaving differently. We start looking at different ways to live and to work and to think and to talk. All of these are initially coming out of this initial condition of dejection. And now we're going to be entering into the knowledge that comes when you start behaving differently than the way you were before that was causing you bondage and suffering. So inevitably, when we begin to act differently than the way we have acted up to the start of the journey, we begin to redesign our lives and redesign our relationship with ourselves and our life. Now, this happens just normally in the course of human life as well. You find out you're doing something wrong. You discover, oh my God, this isn't working. That's a recognition of something not working, which is like dejection. And then it's this, what is it that's not working? What is it that's making me think, or what was my thinking, or how was I behaving that was making it not work? And how can I find a new way to think and behave so it can work? So this movement occurs in the natural course of life. And when you start behaving in new ways, then you say, yeah, this does work. This is easier. This is more effective. This is hitting the nail on the head instead of my thumb every time. It's a figuring out of what works. So what's what we're talking about? We're really talking about what works in truth. What works about the nature of who we are and what is real. So it's the same process. So in this chapter, we're going to explore the nature of this knowledge, and we'll use the Gita as the means of clarifying, elaborating. What is it that happens to a seeker who's come to this particular stage in the cycle? Because it's an inevitable cycle. The first 6 chapters is a cycle. And then sooner or later another dejection comes, because there's always more content, more unworkability, more basis of suffering. And then that creates a new discrimination, a new way to act, a new way to know, so on and so forth. And so these cycle. These first 6 chapters will cycle with you. They'll be with you throughout the entire spiritual journey until there's no journey. And of course, what happens is when the journey's over, you're done, right? It just finishes. That means you're no longer a seeker, you're a finder. And then you live life as a finder, as one who's found. And that's a very different thing than one who lives life as a seeker. When you found out what works, then you're no longer struggling with what doesn't work. You're no longer trying to fix things. You're trying to make them better, improve them, make them more efficient. Because you found the way to be with things so that as they are is perfect. Okay, so the yoga of knowledge, Jnana Yoga. I think what we'll do is we'll start with Satchmayini reading the first few verses.
Okay, chapter 4, Jnana Yoga, the Yoga of Knowledge. The Blessed Lord said, I revealed this imperishable yoga first to Vivaswan. He taught it to Manu, and Manu imparted it to Ishkawaku. Thus it was transferred in succession and came to the royal sages. But due to the impact of time, this eternal path was lost to mankind. Now I am revealing the supreme secret path of yoga to you, since you are my devotee and companion.
Okay, so this is the introduction to this chapter. It's basically saying that this path has been around forever and that it gets revealed in stages. So I am not certain what the first term was of for the yoga first to who? Vivaswan. Vivaswan is the intelligence, the psychic awareness. So it's as if from truth, from Sat, it was first able to be received by the intelligence, the psychic. And then from that, it was able to go to the mind, which is Manu, which is like the moon reflects the sun. The sun is the source of light, but the moon is its reflection. Manu is the moon. So it's the reflection of the knowledge. It's not the knowledge yet itself. It's reflected in the mind. It's not the thing itself, but it's the reflection of the thing. And then from that, it went to Ishwaku. And Ishwaku is the emotional nature, the drives, the vital. So it descends into people's systems through these layers, from the highest layer all the way into our vital layer, until actually it comes to the royal sages, which are those who are able to bring it into their day-to-day life, those who are able to bring it into their body. So it's the nature of the revelation of truth, of what we are as the soul, descending into us and becoming more and more real incrementally. So the Gita is teaching a path that brings truth to all parts of our nature, not just to the psychic, not the intelligence, not just to the mind, not just to the emotional nature, but to the actual physical nature and the way we live and act. This is the uniqueness of the Gita in this revelation. And then in the second verse he says, now I'm revealing this supreme secret path since you are my devotee and companion. It's not going to be revealed unless you're a seeker. It's not going to be shown to you unless you have some aspiration, some devotion for truth, some pull to truth. So this being pulled to truth, or so this aspiration for something that's more real, more true, is what's necessary to begin this revelation. So this is the first of multiple revelations that occur in the Gita. And this attitude of seeking is the prerequisite for this to happen. Okay, continue on.
Arjuna said, Vishwaswan was born before you. How is it that you revealed this yoga to him at the beginning? The Blessed Lord said, Arjuna, you and I both have passed through many births. I have remembered all of them, but you have forgotten them. Although I am unborn, immutable, and the Lord of the beings, I manifest myself through my own Maya by keeping my Prakriti under control. Whenever the light of natural law fades away, and there is an ascendancy of darkness, during those periods I create myself. For the protection of the virtuous, to destroy evil, and to reestablish Dharma, I come again and again.
Okay. So this revelation begins with Arjuna saying, wait a second, You're here before me. How could you have been here at the origin? He's still in his mind. He's still in his programmed self. And he's saying, I don't understand it. If you remember the beginning of the 3rd chapter, he was complaining, you're teaching me this knowledge, yet you want me to do this terrible action. So now he's complaining again. It's pretty much a reflection of seeking, by the way. Complaining is usually a constant companion, too. There should be a yoga complaining. Because it's always the entry point in which the teacher has to move into relationship with the seeker. As long as it's sincerity, the teacher will tolerate and have space for the complaining. Because it's a way of coming to clarification. So what did Krishna do to explain or clarify to Arjuna? He says, I have remembered all my births. We have always been together. You just don't remember it, but I remember every one. So it's a reflection that he's saying this process that we're engaged in right here in the Gita goes on and on eternally. Many, many, many different situations. And also, it points to the continuity of the soul. That the soul can take birth and death and birth and death and birth and death. And something remembers. Something is the string on which all these lives are to beads. And if you come to a certain state of consciousness, this ability to access who you are and who you've been and who you will always be is part of the process of coming to the truth of who you are. So it's the continuity of consciousness that he's pointing to at this point. And this incessant need to continuously reveal this path. He then reveals something of his nature. Now, this is an important concept, these next verses. Although I am unborn and immutable, I manifest myself through my own Maya by keeping my Prakriti under control. Now, there are many new terms in here. The first is Maya. Maya is the apparency of things. Maya is that which includes illusion and delusion. It is that which appears to be real but is not real. Okay, it's the appearancy of reality. So he's saying, I manifest myself by putting on the cloak, an appearance, so that you can see me. Because if I don't wear this cloak, you won't know I'm there. So as he said in the previous chapter, chapter 3, I have no reason to manifest, yet I'm continuously manifesting for the purpose of maintaining world order. So he's restating this and then again. By keeping my Prakriti under control. So what's the Prakriti? The Prakriti is our personality. It's our mind, it's our thoughts, it's our beliefs, it's our opinions, it's our drives, it's our wants, it's our preferences, it's our affections, it's our attachments, it's our desires, it's our hopes. It's our body, it's our sensations, it's our preferences and attractions and repulsions. It's all of that. That's the Prakriti. The Prakriti is the content. It's the thought. The Purusha, another Sanskrit term, is the sat, the contentless, that which has no content, that which has no attributes. So the Prakriti is the cloak. In this case, he's saying, I wear this cloak consciously, and I have it under control. He's speaking to the realized state, one who's come and rested in that consciousness of the soul, and then continues to function in the world, but in a masterful way, in greater and greater capacity to control their Prakriti, to control our personality, control your thinking, to control all of this begins to quiet when the soul takes full possession of an individual being. And the Prakriti begins to organize itself around the being. So this is the demonstration of transformation. It's when the soul enters into the person and the person changes as a consequence. The soul integrates this knowledge, descends through all the different planes, and your Prakriti, which is what it's descending into, transforms, changes in the process. Then he speaks of when he comes. Whenever the light of natural law fades away and there's an ascendancy of darkness, during those periods I create myself. So in the course of our lives and in the course of mankind's evolution, there are periods of darkness. And it's in these periods of darkness that the consciousness becomes so dissatisfied, so miserable, that a cry comes out. A cry arises. So out of dejection comes aspiration. So out of these periods of darkness, what comes forward is the Krishna in us. That the divine in us lets out a cry, asking to be released from its darkness, to be freed from its unwitting identification, attachment that's caused this period of obscurity. I come again and again, whenever there's an ascendancy of darkness. So this speaks of the Gita has pointing to two things. One, the principle of the incarnation, or the avatar, which Krishna in the Vedic tradition represents, an avatar that comes to the world periodically to help lift the collective mankind out of a particular slump, or to help the collective consciousness move into a new era, which is where we are right now, as a matter of fact. The collective consciousness is being lifted into a new level of consciousness, which is bringing forward a new era. So that's one aspect, the manifestation, the incarnation, and that aspect is the Krishna coming for the whole world. And the other aspect is in each of us, our own individual periods of darkness, our own cycle of life, where we rose from sattva, rajas, and then tamas again. In the normal course of human life, these gunas come up in certain predictable cycles. In my experience, it's 6, 9, or 12 years. And within those 6, 9, or 12 years, you come out of your tamas, ascend into sattva, expand into rajas, and then exhaust yourself and return into tamas. So these cycles occur. At the bottom of the tamas cycle, we are in darkness. We are an accumulated gathering of experiences and impressions and karmas, consequences of the actions that had occurred previously in the cycle and in previous cycles. And we are being buried by them. And at the end of the tamas cycle, we're being buried by them. And at the beginning of the sattva cycle, we become aware we're being buried by them. And that creates anguish. And anguish is dejection. So if dejection comes, we're actually already coming out of the darkness. So this is the individual bringing forward of the Krishna, the divinity within us. This light of knowledge coming back to reclaim the kingdom that has been forgotten in the course of our cycles. And this is what the Gita is pointing to. And why does this consciousness come? What is it that's cycling? And that is in the last verse here that we've just read, 170, for the protection of the virtuous, to destroy evil, and to reestablish Dharma. I come again and again. So these are the three qualities of the divine awakening. Three aspects of the spiritual awakening that occur. One is the strengthening of the virtue, which is the strengthening of the light of the soul, strengthening the innate purity of our unconditioned self. So the first is to strengthen that ability of the soul to be felt or known. The second is the destruction of evil, and I call this is actually the transformation of the untruth. It is the changing of what is untrue into true. So it is not really a destroying of the evil. It is a transmutation of that which brought bondage, that which ignorance perpetuated bondage, that behavior or reaction or point of view that has kept us continuing to create the suffering that we are trapped into. And this ability to transmute it, to see it and then transmute it. This is the second part, the second aspect of this new cycle, this shift from a previous consciousness into a higher consciousness. And the last is the reestablishment of Dharma. It means to once again start acting and living in alignment with the higher truth, the true truth that lives us. These three things follow each other and they complete themselves in the Dharma. When you actually learn how to take actions that are aligned with a higher truth, it is what strengthens the virtue and destroys the evil, which in turn reestablishes your ability to live in alignment with truth, which further then strengthens the virtue and further destroys the non-virtue. So this capacity of moving from truth to higher truth is a process of realizing the untruth at progressively higher and higher levels. So the cycle is like an upward ascending spiral, coming again and again. Okay, next, let's continue.
Arjuna, whosoever knows the mystery of my divine birth and divine action is not reborn after death, but attains me. Being free from attachment, fear, and anger, and keeping me constantly in their minds through pursuing the path of pure knowledge, many have attained me. Whichever path men may follow to reach me, I grant their prayer. Men always follow my path. Men worship gods to get quick results from actions, as these are easily granted in this world. On the basis of man's innate nature and tendencies for action, I have created the fourfold order in this world, but I, the imperishable, am always the non-doer.
Okay, still there. So here, Krishna is pointing to the universality of all paths. All paths are actually striving for the same goal. Now, some paths create this diversion where instead of continuing to grow, it tends to rest and seek the enjoyments of what is attained. So those paths will not take you to the same goal, at least initially. All paths ultimately will take you to the same goal. But what is that path? It's not Buddhism, it's not religion, it's not Hinduism, it's none of these things. It's actually something each of us walk in our own way. So everyone eventually ends up with the soul. No matter what journey you take or how weighted you are or how true you are. The only difference is time. How long? So what the Gita is pointing to is its universality. The basic fundamental truths that can be found in all paths. That's why it says in this second chapter, even a little knowledge of this path is sufficient to free you from great fear. Because the sense of progress is tangible. While others wander in different directions, following their whims and their desires, this path sets a trajectory. It sets an intellectual understanding of what the goal is that allows for all the rest of your actions and all the rest of your process to eventually be aligned with that trajectory. So this is what he says, this is my path. But when he's speaking from he's speaking from the fully enlightened, realized state of consciousness. And that's one will come to all of us as soon as we quit being so invested in keeping our little egos in place. As soon as we stop egoing, we become the soul. This is the great thing about this knowledge. This knowledge is always right here, right now. There's nothing for you to go to or to make happen or to create, because it's what's here right now when you get rid of everything else. Once you get rid of everything else, it's right here, right now. It's so simple. It's so plain. It's so ordinary. Yet our ego cannot tolerate that vacuum. It cannot tolerate to live in the state of the soul because it's so habituated in striving and striving and striving, this endless instability, seeking stability. It doesn't know that just by overcoming that or not going with its instability, it would find the stability. The instability is due to the content. It's due to the story. It's due to the personality. It's due to the karmas and inclinations and all the other forces that have shaped us into this separative state of being. Whichever path men may follow to reach me, I grant their prayer. Their prayer, let's use the word aspiration. To anyone who is aspiring to know the truth, I grant you that. It means that it is actually just a matter of perception. And this shifting of once you aspire to have the perception of what is real, what is true, what works, then you'll begin a process that'll clarify your perception. That perceiving of what is true is the knowledge that's being talked about here. The perceiving of what is real, which the Gita calls the soul or the Atman, is the knowledge of what is so right here, right now, eternally, unchanging. So as soon as you aspire, as soon as you have the prayer, it comes to you. The path comes to you. The direction. You then, no matter what you do, as long as you remember the prayer, as long as you stay in touch with your aspiration to know what is real, what is true, then everything you do is a walking on this path. This is the power of intention. This is the power of the intention that arises from this prayer, from this aspiration. It creates a new paradigm for existence than the little, mean, nasty, grubbing, defensive, angry, fearful ego. It doesn't divert. It doesn't be run by these, thinking happiness is over here, and then over here, thinking happiness is over here. And it's just not that you step out of it and suddenly you find a trajectory that has nothing to do with what you've done up to now. And that no matter how you live, as long as you're in touch with your prayer, as long, and the Gita says, as long as you think of me, you will find your way. You keep recovering the prayer because what's praying in you, what's aspiring in you, is the same thing you're seeking. The more you're in touch with the aspiration and the prayer, the reaching forward, the beseechment, you're in touch with that movement in your being, the more you're experiencing your unconditional nature, the more you're conditioning your soul. So simple. All paths lead to the same goal, the Atman, the soul. Every prayer, every aspiration is a unique path to the goal. Even if you all are in a Buddhist, even all of you are Hindus, or even all of you are here in this room or listening to this talk, it is going to be a unique journey that each person travels based on the assemblage of characteristics and qualities that you were born with or inclined towards. Okay, let's continue.
On the basis of man's innate nature and tendencies for action, I have created the fourfold order in this world. But I, the imperishable, am always a non-doer. I never indulge in action, nor have I any attachment to the fruits of action. One who knows me as such is not bound by actions. Knowing the secret of this truth, the seers have performed action from ancient times. Therefore, Arjuna, you too perform actions likewise.
Okay. So let's just pretend that there's 2,500 different possible personalities for human beings. 2,500 different models of cars, right? And you're born into one of those. And you get identified with what you were born into, and you think you're a particular 2,500th of that 2,500th of all the personalities, possible personalities for humankind, that is you. You become the personality. And when somebody else gets born into the same personality in some other part of the world, of course they may look different, they may be in a different culture, they may speak a different language, but they have the same personality. They think the same thing you think. They have the same reactions you have to varying degrees. And they think they are that. But once you come out of that particular personality, just like coming out of a car, you remember, oh, I'm the driver. I have this vehicle that I drive. But who I am is not the vehicle. So all of us have a cluster of inclinations and tendencies, which in Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas they call the 4 major castes. That means each personality has a different role or capacity to be in the world, and a different approach to the world, and a different approach to the spiritual path. So I said 2,500, so we could cluster those 2,500 personalities in 4 different major groups. So, and this whole quality of personality or inclination, we call innate nature. The tendency that came inherent with the vehicle you were born into. I like to call them ancestral karmas, right? The body is the product of the union of my mother and my father, and each of them are product of the union of 4 other people, right? My grandparents on my father's side, the grandparents on my mother's side, and so on exponentially. And effectively, we all carry a little bit of everybody in each of us. When you look at all the possible derivatives of which we are the result. We are the distillation of inclinations, propensities, and tendencies and experiences that have come from the collective consciousness of mankind and has found its expression in its vehicle. And this vehicle carries not just the physical vehicle, it carries an emotional inclination, it carries an energetic inclination, it carries an inclination of affinity or non-affinity, it carries a certain way of thinking, a certain way of looking, a certain way of knowing. So in the Vedas, they define these different characteristics into clusters. The sutras, which are the most simple and ordinary kind of person, very simple, very material, tend to be very material. They don't need much for happiness. They enjoy their life and they don't think much of things. Sitting home, drinking a beer, watching TV is the best pastime for a sutra. And then there's the next one is the Vaishya. The Vaishya is actually ambitious. It wants something. It's the business person. It's the guy or woman who calculates things of how to improve my situation, how to get more of what I want and less of what I don't want, how to control my life. So the Vaishya is always in negotiation with life. It's always calculating and figuring out the benefit-cost ratio of everything. This relationship, this job, this house, these people, this community of people. It's always endlessly trying to calculate things in its favor. So the Vaishya is that Rajas coming out of Tamas. And the next is the Kshatriya. Now the Kshatriya is the Rajas, but at a higher level. They're very initiating. They are able to take on things even if there's not personal benefit for them. They're able to make sacrifices that don't give them immediate fulfillment because for them it's more important in the long run. They're the idealists. They're the people who are striving to improve the world or improve themselves. This is Rajas moving towards Sattva. And then there's the Brahmins. And the Brahmins are those who are primarily Sattvic. They're the philosophers, they're the artists, they're the poets, they're the spiritual awakened people. If they know it or not, spiritually awakened. So they move from, moving up, higher and higher. Each system carries a certain mix of these components. There might be a part of you that's more like a Sudra, and a part of you that's more like a Kshatriya, and a part of you that's more like a Brahmin. In sum total, however, we tend to cluster somewhere in the Vedas in these four categories. One, from a denser vibration to the highest at a higher vibration, a higher frequency. So the path of one who's a Sudra would be different than the path of one who's a Brahmin. The path of one who's a Vaishya, the businessman, the calculator, would be different than the path of a Kshatriya, a warrior, who's striving to bring something new. So it's in this structure that we recognize that each of us have a path that we each will follow. And it will be unique, even if the concepts and structures and temples are the same. As long as there's the prayer, we will travel. As long as there's aspiration, we'll be moving on the path. If those are hidden or forgotten, there's no movement. It's like a water flowing from the mountains, coming off the mountains and the snow melt, heading towards the ocean. Well, there's periods where the plains open up and the water becomes stagnant, quits moving. It doesn't reach the goal of the ocean. So this is true in all paths. There's a tendency to be moving or not moving. The only difference is what is the aspiration determines if we do or not. Our ability to be in touch with the prayer takes us to the completion of this journey of human existence, to divine existence. But without the prayer, there's no current, there's no motor, there's no capacity to travel anywhere. You'll just swirl around, bounce against the shores of where you are and where you've been. The eddies and the swamps of life, accumulating more and more debris, wittingly or unwittingly sinking, becoming heavier, covered with moss and mold and seaweed, and becoming harder to move should a current come. This is the nature of the journey. If you're not moving, then you gather moss, barnacles. You get accumulated, you pick up debris, and you become heavier and heavier. And even if the current came, you can't move much. You're scraping along the bottom. It's only the prayer that keeps us from becoming inert, from losing the momentum. Okay, let's continue on.
I never indulge in action, nor have I any attachment to the fruits of action. One who knows me as such is not bound by actions. Knowing the secret of this truth, the seers have performed action from ancient times. Therefore, Arjuna, you too perform actions likewise. As to what is action and what is inaction, even the wise men are confused. Therefore, I shall reveal to you the truth about action, and this will free you from the evils of action. The effects of action are profound. Therefore, one should know what is action, what is inaction, and what is prohibited action. One who sees action in inaction and inaction in action is truly a yogi and is wise, He can perform all actions.
Okay, now we're getting into more of the meat of this chapter. Action, as we revealed in chapter 3, is a means to truth. Through action, however, if you're taking action with a desire motive or an attachment to the outcome, then that action is likely to perpetuate the patterns of your old nature, the inclinations and the impulses and the preferences of your old nature. So there are actions that will continue, that the actions we take that are because of our programming will continue and reinforce the programming. Well, if we stop those actions, which is called inaction, we stop taking the actions based on our programming, our inclinations, then that stops the accumulation of that particular cluster of karmas. And if we could come to the state of actionlessness, then even the actions we take are undoing the inclination to the action. So, for example, prohibited action would be actions that perpetuate the string that wraps around and binds you. It's the rope that ties you to your identity as a separate personality. So every time you complain, every time you want it different than it is, every time you desire something, anytime you try to hang on to something, you're just adding more and more to the baggage of your bondage. When you're taking actions based on those inclinations, you're just adding more baggage. When you stop taking those actions, then for as long as you're not taking those actions, you're not adding anything to the baggage. But you still have the baggage. So it's only through inaction that you begin to unwind the inclinations. To be able to do inaction, to reach the state of actionlessness, was what was revealed in chapter 3. And now we're expanding on it. So relative to our paradigm, we're already truth. And the only reason that prevents us from knowing truth is this baggage of untruth. So once we can undo the baggage, then what's going to happen? We're going to reveal what's been there all along. That's all we're going to do, is reveal what's been there all along. So that's what we're talking about. To come to who you are is always a process of subtraction, always a process of undoing, of letting go of how you think, letting go, doing the behaviors that keep perpetuating, wittingly or unwittingly, your suffering, the thinking patterns, the complaint, the dissatisfactions, the trying to fix. All those patterns keep feeding themselves. It's only when you stop them that they don't feed themselves. But the inclination will still be there until you start unwinding it. And how do you unwind it? You unwind it by taking actions that are aligned with the truth of who you are. You're taking actions in touch with your prayer. You're taking actions in touch with that willingness to sacrifice everything else for that. That offering, that gift of the preferences, that giving up of the inclinations and giving up of the self-defeating thinking and acting and speaking that's been running you. The willingness to sacrifice your bondage, which is the only reason it's in place is because you're attached to it, because you think it's you. The willingness to let go of these things. This is what frees you. This letting go of the baggage is actionlessness. So when you still perform in the world, you still operating in the world, it's not necessarily that in every area you have to be conscious that I am stopping behaving the way I'm inclined to behave at this moment. That's one way to do it. But rather that you have an intention, an aspiration in every situation to be in truth, to be in the correct relationship to existence based on that truth. to be in the prayer. So what is action and what is inaction? So it's like one action. Action is what binds you. Inaction is neutral. Prohibited actions bind you aggressively. That's like taking on an addiction, letting yourself go into rage, letting yourself feed a self-destructive inclination. That's a prohibited action because that strongly reinforces the pattern of accumulating bondage and staying where you are and not changing. Of course, you should know something about this bondage. This string you ruin. It's you. It's your personality. It's you that doesn't want to change. It's you that doesn't want to give up. It's you that's perpetuating. You can't imagine giving up these things because they're so important. They're how I keep a sense of worth, or how I keep protected, or how I get what I want. How dare you suggest I should give these up? We're the bondage. We're so tangled in it that the very thing that's trapping us from the truth of ourselves is us. Unwittingly keep reinvesting in the us, the individual self, the content of our individuality. I am my personality. I am my thoughts. Don't dare you tell me otherwise. I am right about it. I have to be right, because if I'm wrong, then I could die. If I'm wrong, then I'm defeated. If I'm wrong, then I'm less. And to be less is the most frightening thing to the bond itself. To be diminished, to be less. And yet that's the very pathway that takes us to freedom. So knowing, understanding this is what is being talked to in this chapter. And how do you organize yourself so that you can begin to take actions from within your bonded condition, because you're only in the 4th chapter. You're only just right now kind of catching on that your actions make a difference. In fact, the nature of the word karma is both the inclination for action. That's what karma is, both the inclination. The other is the consequence of previous action. So action creates action. So karma creates karma. You take an action, there's a consequence. This consequence is much bigger than you know. Why? Because we're all interconnected. That this whole manifested creation is a weave of interconnected components of which each of us are a node. And what we do or don't do affects the entire collective. And everything we do or don't do has a consequence, for good or ill or neutral. So we're constantly in a sea of every time we move, we're setting things off, if we know it or not. We become immune to these consequences. We become numb to it, like a bull in a china shop. Or you set a cat into a room full of mouse traps and ping pong balls. Watch what happens. Give it 10 minutes and there's not a ping pong ball that's not flying. All the traps are set off. So that's the same way. We're just in this minefield. And all our actions have consequences. And these consequences leaves a karma, leaves an impact, an inclination that weighs us down. If it's not undoing or neutral, we accumulate, we keep feeding the inclinations that would have us continuing to perform actions that keep us bound. So understanding this, actions have consequences. And then being able to experience the consequences. If you can experience the consequences of your actions, you can learn. But if you're not aware of the consequences of your action, you can't learn. You don't know why everything's going wrong. You were just driving down the road with the rearview mirror and everybody kept crashing into you. What was the problem? You don't understand that it's your orientation that's in error. You're completely a victim with no capacity to learn and grow. That's what bondage is. And we're all in bondage even at this moment. Even those who have some degree of enlightenment, some degree of awakening. I assure you, you're still in bondage. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here listening to me drone on. So becoming aware that actions have consequences is what this chapter, these verses are pointing to. The effects of action are profound, verse 179. Therefore you should know what is action, what is inaction, and what is prohibited action. One who can see these, one can see where you're binding yourself, one who could see where you're being neutral, and one could see where you're freeing yourself, then you're truly a wise person. You're a wise being. You've been able to bring some knowledge about the nature of how the world, how this whole dimension works. Okay, let's continue.
One who is able to perform actions without a desire motive, and whose actions are sanctified by the fire of knowledge, is fit to be called a sage. One who is not attached to the fruits of action, is ever satisfied, and no longer depends on others, really does nothing, even though fully engaged in action. A person who has controlled his mind and senses, is free from desire and material hankering, does not incur sin, and performs action through the body only. When one is satisfied with whatever is available without asking, is free from the problems of opposites and jealousy, and is balanced in success and failure, then he is not bound by actions. One who is free from attachments and has no identification with the body or the mind, and is firmly established in knowledge, for whom work is a sacrifice, for such a person all works melt away.
Okay. So these 4 verses are describing the yoga of knowledge. So this is getting into the technology, and it will continue on and give you specific directions about the different types of actions you can take that can free you. And the first principle behind this is that actions done as a sacrifice, or we could say as an offering, free you. So anytime you control or manage an inclination of your body to eat, the senses, your judgments, your preferences, of your emotions, the inclination to be angry or to be irritable or express your complaint or your dissatisfaction, any time you are not allowing the programmed individual you are to act, then you are offering up that, and that offering is what undoes that inclination and will allow greater and greater ability to access the truth of who you are. Right? So if there's a light bulb in midst of a weave of yarn, the more yarn you take off, the more light peeks through the yarn, the more luminous the yarn becomes. And so that's the principle. Knowledge comes through the subtraction of the inclination that keeps the yarn accumulating. So when you start undoing the inclinations, which require effort and sacrifice, then that which you are begins to radiate, becomes available to you, and your cry becomes more clear, your aspiration more strong, your clarity brighter, sharper, more particular. And it gives you clues of the inclination. One is not attached to the fruit of action, ever satisfied, no longer depends on others. Those are 3 criteria. Now how can you can't just say, okay, I'm going to not be dependent on others, right? Well, in a reverse way, you actually are, in your rejection of being dependent on others. So you have to have actually a certain degree of consciousness to get to a place where you cannot be dependent on others. But you can at least be aware that this dependency on others is binding you. So it's a process by which you become aware of just the opposite, not attached to the fruit of actions. You may notice that you're really quite invested with the fruit of action, and you get angry and frustrated when things don't turn out the way you want them to turn out. So, but you can know that that investment is causing me suffering. you can know that that expectation is why I'm more miserable. So it's this process that's revealing itself through the struggle to bring forward this detachment, the struggle to accept what is occurring rather than want it to be different. And in that process, that struggling, you begin to bring on the quality, you begin to release, undo the inclinations to those actions, and therefore reveal that which would allow true satisfaction with what arises. A person who has subdued his mind. All right, how many of you have subdued your mind? Don't raise your hands. The mind will go on and on. It's an inclination. We've been feeding that habit in our culture really strongly. We got it wound up tight. It's spinning. That's an energy at our breath. We got a lot of spring wired up in thinking. So even if you make a lot of progress on the spiritual path, that spring's still got a big charge. So learning how to be present with the ever-whirling thought structure is very tedious and difficult. So, but what you do is you become aware, okay, this is suffering. Once you become aware of your thoughts, you begin to realize how much thinking is suffering. How painful it is to have an opinion or an expectation or a judgment. You begin aware of what it is that's running you. Then you're beginning to undo the inclination to continue it. But you can't, because of the previous karmas that you accumulated, you're going to have to endure it calmly as it unwinds. You're going to have to learn how to be with it in inaction or actionlessness, to be present with it, so that it can unwind that energy. And as it unwinds, it relaxes. And as it relaxes, the mind grows more quiet. You have more spaces between thoughts. And this is true in every part of our system. In our drives, our gut, in our heart, in our physical habits and routines. The same winding has occurred. So what are we doing? We're coming out of suffering. We're coming out of those things that cause us suffering. We're waking up to the fact that they cause suffering, and we're learning to develop the correct actions to undo that suffering. So this is what these 4 verses are pointing to. Is free from desire, has given up possessions and sense enjoyment, satisfied with whatever is available without asking, is free from problem of opposites and jealousy, balanced and successful and failure. Well, if you had all those attributes, you wouldn't need to be reading these verses. So, one who's free from attachments, has no identification with the body or mind, established in knowledge. So being established in knowledge, of course, is to be established in the radiance of yourself. Okay, so we're going to finish. We're ending here for today, and we'll pick up the next part of Chapter 4 in our next session. So we'll complete with a meditation.